Hi guys, this is Pilleater, and I am talking to John. Hi John.
Hey, how's it going? Really?
I'm doing good. So we were talking online and we're discussing these whole funny stuff actually about Asian-Aryanism, and you found it the ideology quite interesting, right?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of negative spin, especially, within the alt-right and online communities and the Harper subreddit. So to find your perspective is quite interesting because it's quite a positive perspective, and it's more so that I'm trying to understand the phenomena because it is a phenomena.
I know you're from New Zealand, and you said that there is kind of this mix between the New Zealanders, some of the island people, and Asians in there, and how much of that is happening over there? Do you think there is actually more of the Eurasian happening, or is it kind of segregated?
Uh, Mostly at this point segregated, though Eurasian couples are becoming more common here. Uh, I would say that it's very similar probably to the United States.
Ah, yeah, yeah. I mean, in the eyes where I'm from on the East Coast, it works like this. If you're in the suburbs, it's kind of you're that it's mostly white families and white suburbs. But when you go to the city, there's the upper liberal white elites with their Asian girlfriends or whatever, and it's mostly in the major cities. And you have kind of the black underclasses and the ghettos, and but I just find it interesting, especially being in college, that it seems to be that white male Asian female, it happens much more often if you have come from money, and there's been some talk on that, probably because from what I hear from the alt-right critics is that most Chinese women or girls are gold diggers, and they're only after social status. But given a chance that when they turn 30, they'll be ending back up with their Chinese, male friend, because they'll just go back to who has more of the social power, or compared to whites that'll just flirt, like it's a phase or something, what they might have with Asian women. That's one of the biggest criticism I hear on the alt right.
Possibly, and I think a lot of it's to do with values as well, social values. Like if you go on a dating site or something, say OkCupid or something, and you read a lot of dating profiles, and a lot of East Asian women have very conservative values, which I think a lot of so-called white men prefer.
How how long were you a part of the alt right, and do you now consider yourself still on the alt right?
Uh, well, I started off being introduced mainly to things like the works of, Julius Evola, the
Mm-hmm.
Italian philosopher. Not so much through countercurrents back then, the internet, like 10 years ago, back
Useless,
then.
yeah.
So, yeah,
No,
it wasn't so prevalent.
I was
So,
reading it when I was 17. So
but mostly books, by publishing companies such as Arctos, a lot of I had a friend, who was very much into horror and occult subjects, particularly, and Arctos Media was one, amongst a few, and a lot of it is based around kind of alt-right ideas before the term alt-right became common. Like, I don't think I remember Richard Spencer back then. I knew Greg Johnson was around for a while, and a lot of the writers, I noticed that you had, what was it, like a peep meme with Crowley on it.
oh, yeah, yeah. Well, that's funny because I don't know, maybe meme magic has something to do with Crowley's interpretation of it. And I just thought it was funny. I gave my Twitter page an update on that. But yeah, I think the Pepe Crowley it means something with meme magic. So
In my opinion, there's a blog by a guy called Recluse that's linked with, as you know, Jason Horsley, and he talks about the so-called ASC, American Security Council, and various kind of spook, intelligence agencies intelligence agencies, groups, right-wing think tanks and things like that that are linked with, the alt-right, and there's almost like a hidden or a cult right. There's
Yes.
definitely a very kind of, you know much about the neo-reactionary movement?
Yes. I was into that when I was in my teen years.
Yeah, that was run by what's that guy, Nick Land, who was
Hmm.
also into horror, and I used to talk to a lot of those people, and I became quite deeply involved with that. I was always more interested in traditionalism and perennialist philosophy and things like that, rather than straight outright, kind of values. Though I was very interested in things like Miguel Serrano's books.
Yes.
Yeah. Esoteric, that's it. The Ahnenerbe, the exhibitions to Tibet, and that's kind of like an Asian-Aryanism kind of idea. I don't know if you know much about that.
About
There's a
what?
lot of really, the Tibetan exhibitions of the 30s,
Okay.
where they went to basically discover the roots of the so-called Aryan race. A lot of people were talking
Okay.
about Shambhala, underground cities, and they did a lot of things like physiognomy, facial measurements, and things like that. The Ahnenerbe was, I'm not sure if Dr. Mengele was part of it, but I don't think so. I think he was more Totenkopf, so it was less to do with, say, the SS death camps and things, and more supposed death camps than it was to do with archaeology and history. It's very interesting. A lot of the Indiana Jones films are based on certain SS characters like Otto Rahn, who was involved with Cartharism, which is basically a sect that was wiped out in France sometime. I think it was the 13th or 14th century, sometime around there, as heretics.
It's funny you mentioned Miguel Serrano and Evola, because when I first learned about them was through Nicholas Gulich Clark's book, Black Sun, which I think is a really good introduction to some of the more esoteric far right things. I mean, the book Black Sun by Gulich Clark has been criticized because it's a little on the PC side. It's very of a liberal narrative. However, it's a really good introduction to such studies as Gulich Clark also did, the occult roots of Nazism. He had his own book on Savitri Devi, and it's certainly John Morgan of Arctos says that Gulich Clark is definitely an influence in that background. And I have had to read more of Serrano. It's just his books are so rare and expensive, and the only I was read was through Gulich Clark's commentary on him.
Yeah, I've seen, I think, some online ebooks now. They have a company called the 42 Club or something produces them. So they're easier to get because they're starting to reprint more of them, but they're very odd, and they're kind of linked to a lot of the occult groups that were based around Nazi Germany at the time, like the German Norden, which is a kind of group of lodges they had. There was Karl Marie Villegut, they called him Hitler's Rasputin, or Himmler's Rasputin, and he was a guy who helped build the Wawelsburg Castle, which is where the so-called Black Sun symbol was first seen. There's a whole occult scene around that. I actually knew a guy who lived there, because I think there's a German or army base or something based in Wawelsburg, but that's a whole other series of topics. You're getting into guys like more shady outright or righteous figures like Michael Aquino. I think the guy from Non, Boyd Rice.
Yeah, Boyd Rice.
People
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
Boyd Rice is really funny. I have yet to get him on the Stark Truth. He's a pretty interesting guy, but there's a one book publishing called Underworld Amusements, and they have a book called the Occult Technology of Power. That's for being sold for $8.88, and it was one of those books by I think Anton LaVey and I think some other guys. They liked it. It was during the time that I don't know. It was like this weird thing that there's this Illuminati running things, and I've never read it, but it's certainly interesting, and I'm tempted to buy it. Right now, also, Underworld Amusements is right now selling a reissue of Max Stirner's The Ego of His Owns from the George Steiner Root to the Right edition. It's limited to 45. It's being sold right now, and I'm actually excited to reread that as I remember reading Max Stirner in my sophomore year when on my own in the library, and I found it was a very interesting read. And at the same time, people joke about the whole spooks thing, and Steiner's in that between of. It's interesting though.
Sounds like, yeah, a 45.
Limited to 45 editions.
Yeah.
There's still copies right now on Underworld Amusements, and it's being sold for $25, whatever shipping. Ships mid-February, and it's a nice little edition of the book. But, yeah, as for Evola, I mean, I've had recently read The Metaphysics of Sex, and I do think Fascism Few for the Right from Arctos are really good reads on Evola. Very deep, but I think Countercurrents Online has a lot of free stuff by Evola right now that you can read about. But you could get really deep with Evola, especially Ride the Tiger and Men of Ruin. I think it is.
Men Amongst the Ruins. I think
Amongst
it's called.
the Ruins. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read that one, so I mean, it is very interesting, Evola.
Evel is basically a Neoplatonist. A lot of writers' thought is fundamentally based on Plato, or the idea of the theory of emanationism, which is where you have an absolute reality that's kind of a god or something, and various layers underneath that. So it scales down, in terms of like the spiritual world, and underneath that is the physical world, and there's various what they call in Greek hypostases, which are realms, I guess, and a lot of Eastern thought is based around that too. There's a guy, Cairo Nishida, I think, the Kyoto school, Nishida, yeah, and he tries to correlate a lot of Western philosophy, particularly German idealism, with Japanese thought, and a lot of this is really interesting. There's a guy called Michael Sarion, who's on YouTube. I don't know if you've heard of him. He does some work with Stefan Molyneux, and he goes off on tangents. He can have some really strange ideas. Like, he's very much into the Illuminati theories. He's very much into the Anunnaki, I think they're called. The you know what I'm talking about. The Sumerian texts. The people believe that human beings were created aliens, and but he does have some interesting books. Amongst them is getting back to Crowley. Crowley was part of an organization called the Golden Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
And before the Golden Dawn, I think there were other writers, who wrote along some Western esoteric thought. I think Elvis Levi and people like that. But Golden Dawn had a lot of horror writers. I think was it Kenneth Grant? I don't know if he was a horror writer. Algernon Blackwood, people like that. But Crowley, I think, was kicked out, or he left the Golden Dawn, and he started the OTO, Ordo Tempo Orientalis, Order of the Eastern Star, something like that. I don't know too much about the OTO, but I know that a lot of the Golden Dawn is based on earlier organizations, and I think like the Rosicrucians and Martinism, I think, which is a kind of occult, Kabbalistic, what's the word? Occult, Kabbalistic alchemy. Sorry, so a lot of it's to do with Western esotericism through alchemy, which I don't understand, and that sort of goes back to people like Jacob Boehme, the mystic who, his writings are almost incomprehensible, maybe there's some sort of key to his writings, or I think like Evola talks a lot about these writers as well, particularly Eckhart, Meister Eckhart, the so-called Western Buddhist, who writes a lot about non-duality. And however, Michael Sarion does expand a lot on this further with modern organizations like BOTA, Builders of the Adamantium. That's actually a BOTA lodge near my house. I've thought about attending several times, but I've never actually been. I was recommended to go in there based on things like the tarot cards and archetypes through the tarot trumps and Western esotericism. But beneath it all, in my own personal opinion, I believe there's this sort of syncretic reality, that binds all these so-called mystery traditions, Western thought, Eastern thought, through perennialism. And Evola is really interesting because he finds all these correlations in his different books with things like Tantra. What else does he study? Buddhism. I think he wrote a really famous book called The Doctrine of Awakening. And interesting thing about Evola is that he was linked with a lot of far-right so-called terrorism groups, which I also find really interesting. I think there's a bombing in a train station in Bologna, who was known as the Lord of Terror or something for organising some of these.
Clark opened up Evola by saying that was because of his cause, and it's a weird relation clicking. But
anyway, sorry. What were you saying?
I found always Alan Watts to be kind of an introduction to some of the Eastern studies. I find some of his he has written so much, Alan Watts, yet he's kind of little talked about because of his pop Buddhism background, and you kind of have to discover him for yourself. I know James J. O'Mara finds Alan Watts and Evola as one of his main influences, and especially that Alan Watts is loved on Countercurrents and has this love for the East, but has a dedication back to this Western thing. But I would say, there's that Asian-Aryan thing at least being talked about. But as for like horror writers, it's funny you said Algernon Blackwood. I love Blackwood as well as William Hope Hodgson. I think some of their weird fiction is very interesting, especially the esoteric nature of the subconscious, like of Lovecraft's Doom that came to Sarnath.
I think a lot of that was based on a movement called the Decadence, which was slightly earlier, I think, than the weird fiction era. That was more, I think Poe was a decadent, Edgar Allan Poe, and I'm not sure, the guy who wrote the Flowers of Evil, Baudelaire, I think, people like that, and they had this kind of pessimistic view of reality where everything was really kind of bleak and dark, there's no redeeming feature in humanity, versus, I think, earlier writers like Byron and Shelley, the Romantics, who had this kind of, I think it's called transcendentalism or something, kind of dark but also optimistic view, of ultimate human overcoming, through the spirit or whatever. But yeah, very, very interesting writers, especially since people like H.P. Lovecraft, weird fiction and things, they kind of lived in this limbo between science and the earlier world of, you could say, occultism, like a lot of people say Lovecraft wasn't interested in the occult, and some people say, well, they've taken a lot of his writings and applied it to, you were talking about chaos magic. Not someone like Spear, like Austin Osman Spear, but more, I think, ad lib kind of chaos magicians. I don't actually approve of or think much of chaos magic, but some people seem to take it very seriously.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend the other night, and he was telling me this weird theory about chaos magic. He was all for Asian-Aryanism and telling me his side of the thing. He said you can harness chaos magic by masturbation, and here's how. You basically have a thought of a girl in your head. Instead, you masturbate her to her at night and imagine a scene as if you were to have sex with her. Eventually, some metaphysical will, you will land up with a girl like her, very similar to her, and that action will come out. So as long as you believe it. It was something, he didn't have anything to back it up on. He just said, I've experienced this. And I was like, you know what? I've experienced that too. And my friend was kind of joking. Oh yeah, and that's chaos magic.
As far as I'm aware, chaos magic is generally a kind of a ritual magic, though it's more based around things like sigils, creating your own path, so to speak, and utilizing almost like pop culture to create. I'm not too sure actually. I'd have to get back to you on that. It's not, but there is a lot of ceremonial magicians on the right. There's a guy called Manon Wells. He runs a blog called Aristocrats as a Soul, I think, or something like that. And he talks a lot about Enochian magic, which is something that, according to the founder of Bota, I can't quite remember his name right now, but he was very anti-Enochian magic. You know what I'm talking about in terms of Dr. D.
Dr. D. I mean, there's this one esoteric guy from Red Ice Radio who's been making a scene, 666 something. I don't watch his videos, but he's in that whole black magic stuff. But it is an interesting thing, the whole esoteric thing. I like it so far as it has something to do with unlocking your creative potential. But other than that, it seems it's just... I have some friends who are into paganism. Some people think it has a form of nationalism, but I think of it as more like this role-playing thing where it's like they like these things but want to have a bigger meaning to their message. I think of it as being like an avant-garde, whimsical artist or something. I don't know. Or just being a creative writer.
It's interesting that you talk about paganism. That actually jogged my memory about something I did actually want to talk about. We were going to talk a little bit about Asperger's and autism and,
yes,
the genetic legacy of Neanderthals on Asperger's autistic people. And one person that comes to mind when you say paganism is Vaj Vikernes. And the reason I say that is I don't know if you're aware, but his wife, Marie Cachet, I think that's his real name. Cachet, I'm not sure quite how to say it. It's French, I think. And she did a series of articles called Forebears. They made it some videos. I think they sold it as a box set or something like that. He lives on a farm now in the middle of Norway somewhere, I think. So he married this French girl, and apparently she has Asperger's or autism. And they talk a lot about how European people's ancestors, come from, I think, Central Asia or Europe, and how they were into shamanism as an early form of, and there's something called the bear cult, which they believe is a kind of a Neanderthal primitive religion. I haven't read too much into it, but it's interesting because what we're saying about how did you read the Ardos article that I sent?
I went over it briefly, but not that much. No,
you get the gist of the idea though. There's basically, I think what they're trying to say is people who have Asperger's autism have a differently wired brain, but also different genetic composition to most people, and that modern human beings are descended of Cro-Magnoids, from Africa, supposedly, and also Neanderthals, who are a kind of native or primitive race that lived in Europe, sort of in prehistory. Primitive hominid theory, I think it's called. However, in what I'm trying to say in terms of Edenism and things, what they're saying is that people who express, Aspergioid traits are genetically distinct, from people who do not, neurotypicals and things like that. So it's not just like psychological mental disorder. It's an entirely different type of human being, and that's kind of where we get into Edenism as well, which is the theory of basically, it was started, I think, by Ardos. I'm not sure of his name. However, another guy called Tex Arcane, who runs a blog called Voltco, he came up with a lot of theories. He believed he was Neanderthal and he had some type of epigenetics or something, where he had some accident with lye, which is a strong kind of caustic substance, and it altered his genetics, and all these Neanderthal traits came out, and he got bigger and smarter, and because he believed Neanderthals were the original creative race. However, they had issues in terms of introversion and over creativity and things, and when they merged with Cro-Magnons, or Homo sapiens sapien, as he likes to say, they created the modern human being. So everybody who is not African has some of these genes. This is sort of a alternative theory to out of Africa, and they say not many African Americans or even Africans have autism because they are pure sapiens or whatever. And no, it's a really interesting theory. It was taken up by another guy called Koenig Soul, and he had a blog called Koenig Soul, and that was where what was that Brony's guy name again?
Buttercup.
Buttercup Jew, yeah, he's really into that sort of thing, and he told me to join, but I'm quite disparate. I tend to be very wary of joining things. I'm very much on the fringes, I guess, and I try and take a more syncretic, holistic view of things because I don't like ascribing to any one particular theory. However, he came up with a bunch of phrenology tests, so what he did is he took facial composites, mapped them all together and said, well, if you look like this, you probably have dominant recessive traits, due to autism or personality types and things like this. It's kind of like a lot of people these days would say it's pseudoscience, but it's very interesting.
It's like, it's weird that there's this mix between autism and Edenism. Edenism would reject the out of Africa theory because, well, for one thing, if you think about the out of African theory, most of it has been just African worship, or at least that we're all common ancestors and our great-great-great-grandfather is probably black. That's usually like the liberal misconception of the whole out of Africa theory. When some have, debunked that and showed the liberal propaganda behind it. Unlike, Edenism, it says that, well, it's not exactly out of Africa. There's different, traces of where we were born from. And so if you think of like what Jason Horsley does with his whole, Auticulture, website and his book, Seen and Not Seen, is he's like talking about that he is a unique individual and therefore a part of this unique super race or something. It's kind of like you've heard this from the Nubian or black, we built the pyramids, or some esoteric alien, extraterrestrial, and then all of a sudden there's that thing, Western civilization came in, they knocked all the Sphinx noses down, and they actually took African culture, and, you can get into strange conspiratorial arguments like that. However, this is really interesting because it makes you feel like the person who has autism is a super special person, as he is both primitive but knows some wisdom about the world that the normal person does not.
Well, I guess he takes it to the point where he says that most autists, breed geniuses. So, if somebody is incredibly high IQ or focused on something to the point of obsession, it breeds genius behavior, so genius itself is an autistic trait. The other interesting thing, as relates to you and Asian-Aryanism and the fact that so many autistic white people get along well with a lot of, say, Japanese people who also have a high prevalence of autism and shut-in behavior. Is it Hikimoru, I think they call it?
Yeah.
Is that, they could have very much a lot of genetic traits in common. I know that the Japanese genetics are quite distinct, from Western European genetics. However, both groups have a very similar amount of Neanderthal DNA, and not just the Japanese. This is across all kind of Northeast Asians, I guess, and that leads to the high prevalence of autism and autistic type behavior. So there is definitely a genetic component, to Asian-Aryanism. Whether this is healthy or safe or whatever, I still don't know. Like I said to you earlier when I was talking.
Yeah. Because we could be talking about a coming race of people who are Eurasian or, both white and Asian. Most, people on the right will say, well, if you're mixed race, you're obviously a mutt dog and you're not purebred. And that if you have mutt genes, you could be retarded or autistic or not built, right? It's this argument, especially on the Hapa Reddit, that if you're, half Asian, that like a dysfunctional or mentally retarded child, it's like what Eurasian writer Tiger's been saying. He's been saying that my life is doomed because I'm actually half Asian, half white, and I'm not a normal, healthy being, and I should just be a pessimistic, hedonistic, self-suicidal creature and just tell others and, just cry in my own doom. And that's kind of dangerous if you think about that, because if you look at Brazil with the whole, Japanese Brazilians, or in Jamaica with the Chinese Jamaicans, they have developed an authentic culture that has grown, and there've been some success on those backgrounds, and they've made institutions to protect one another. However, it's also true that it's not. Like, the one thing I like to tell everyone, in no way am I saying abolish the white race or that I'm anti-white or something like that. I don't promote those things. And it seems you can only have if you have a healthy mom and a healthy dad, you promote a healthy child. If you have whites and if you have Asians, and then there'll be a mix between the two, and then they'll have a child group, right? If all the white people go out of the world, then China will just take over the world and put everyone on like a wax museum or on dodo display, and everything will just be chaotic, right? And I always tell this to a friend, well, if the Chinese are gone, then obviously we would lack the benefit of having the innovation of, mass-produced resources, classic East Asian mysticism, it seems like you can't live without the other. And there's humans on this earth, and they have been, and through through being in close proximity, other races have been formed. However, we do quite know that the whole multicultural and diverse thing is a forced paradigm. It's forced racial mixing, and it's not good. However, what I've examined is that whites know that multiculturalism and diversity is not good. However, they've discriminated and chose their favorite non-whites, namely Asians, to be compatible people and call themselves multicultural and diverse, while they leave the other non-whites, like blacks and Mexicans and Indians and whatnot, to the side. And so what I'm saying is, if whites continue to believe in the whole multicultural and diverse paradigm and have Asian lovers, they'll produce like this Eurasian offspring. And are they supposed to believe in the white paradigm too and have this weird, like, white racial consciousness that denies being white? Or do they have this new identity where they should be yellow-pilled and stop this new cuckery and call it Asian-Aryanism? So,
well, in terms of how I'll take the Japanese, because it's mainly who I've dealt with, more Japanese. They tend to think of themselves as almost not Asian like the rest of Asians, which is something that strikes me as really odd, particularly in terms of, most of Japanese culture is derived from China, the language, kanji, and I'd say a lot of the food practices and cultural, writing, probably clothing style, things like that, definitely developed over long periods of isolation in Japan. The Japanese also share around about 25% Chinese DNA, so obviously when I hear these Japanese people say, this Japanese girl, and she said, I want to move away, she was in the city, she was doing a homestay, they call it a working holiday in New Zealand, and she said, I want to get away from all the Asian people. And I was thinking, well, because she didn't like the Chinese, she didn't like the Koreans. There's definitely a very hierarchical thing amongst Asians, and I've noticed that. To me, it seems kind of understandable, but also quite disturbing in some ways. Particularly when you think in terms of things like World War II, organizations such as. Did we talk about Nippon Keigai?
Yeah.
Sorry.
What's that?
Nippon Keigai,
Uh-huh.
Japan Conference, which is kind of a right-wing element in Japan that seeks to kind of reverse the Meiji Restoration principles and later kind of Enlightenment principles, and take Japan back, to almost like the feudal ages in terms of culture, or pre-World War II Japan, and very interesting actually what's happening in Japan, and yeah, it's hard to tell.
But it's funny they have Japan studies, Nihongo. Like it's a study for about Japanese interest. I mean, the equivalent in America is like English studies, right? They pretend English studies is it's really just white nationalist studies. Nobody wants to say it, but Japan has their own Japanese studies. It's a completely natural thing to understand your background and race. And in the American situation, however, we look at it as, is it going to get you a job? And the only job that gives you that is teaching. However, it's like, how are you going to teach non-whites about why white people are so great? And this is usually a liberal argument that they'll have, or some conservative thing. And it's just, I think people gravitate toward things that are very similar to themselves. And I mean, I subscribe to the whole bell curve and J. Philippe Rushton thing. And it's just something about race that's so real, and that people are different. Now, for the case of whites and Asians, I do believe that there has been this East and West tradition between liking each other. I mean, accordingly, Schopenhauer and even Nietzsche would also say in some of their memoirs that Oriental women are so exotic and pretty and wish they could be with them. Even far as back, you see that tradition. And today, now that we can go across the pond and be in those two different countries at once, especially more of the Asians being over here in America, there is going to be more of that compromise between white male, Asian female, and I say this again, even Asian male, white female. It's just going to, it's the only other non-white candidate that is acceptable in a society which could be called multicultural, right? I find it quite offensive when somebody, there's a black kid and the black kid says, he wants to be a part of this, right? He wants to be a part of an Asian. Well, the thing is, it's not, the statistics are not there, right? There's no really black male, Asian female, or for that matter, Asian male, black female, right? It just doesn't happen. And if you were to go to a place, the best result I would say is just Southeast Asia, the darker skinned Asians, is more of a home for that. And once again, it's the same issue in America that whites shouldn't pay for an institution or manufactured inauthentic cultures for that to happen, right? It seems that black Americans today hold on to multicultural and diversity is because they need it in order to play gives me dat, as the alt-right calls it. That if you don't have what I don't have, if you have what I don't have, then I deserve to have it, right? And so blacks support multiculturalism because it means they'll like me. And it's kind of really selfish and disturbing. I really think people make proximities and people discriminate. And the biggest discrimination and proximity is whites and Asians, right? And all the other non-whites out, No, I don't hate black people. I'm just saying that they're gonna have to make their own institutions on that matter.
Well, in my opinion, it comes back down to the you could say expression or expression. Yeah, sorry, that's the word of autistic or Neanderthal genes, and that's prevalent, across both, or conscription of genes. Sorry, that's what I was trying to say. That's the, what you're saying about black people is that they just don't have the culture to fit in with Asian or white culture because they don't understand each other. They see a white person and they're very sort of introverted and quiet, and they see a nerd, straight away, and they see this, they see that, versus, and they don't have, in my opinion, such a prevalence or proximity towards things like abstract thought in terms of mathematics or book reading or philosophy. And I'm not trying to say this in a way that's disparate and informative, you could say, but it's just, I think you're right. There's a far greater proximity, and also in terms of attraction, I don't know, but
it's like the Kalergi plan, right? The Kalergi plans insist that Kalergi said there'll be a white Asian race, and they will reproduce with a Negroid race, and they'll make an ancient Egyptian race run by a Jewish overlord masters, right? It sounds so surreal in science fiction, and it's true. And I think Kalergi was completely misunderstood, right? The thing is, he should have said, okay, there will be a white Asian people, because one, Kalergi was both Hungarian and Japanese. And then, that will happen, and you can have your white Asians, but they don't have to, give in to demands to blacks, right? It seems to me that, there's this contract with multicultural and diversity that if you're supposedly a multicultural and diverse people, you have to let go of your racial identity and then be a part of this one cafe au lait, one brown mixed race of people. And that supposedly is the magical answer. But it's so stupid because the only people that are having racial consciousness are brown, namely black, that if you were to race mix, you're most likely, if including black people, you will have a brown person. And a brown person is most likely to consider himself black. It really is an anti-white thing. And so I think of the whole multiculturalism and diversity thing a forced racial conflict, like that status in Brazil. And I strongly believe in discrimination and healthy and respecting neighbors. That's how you make good racial bonds. Now, the thing is, I believe that white and Asians have became into close proximity with one another because of the current last 40-year paradigms. And with all the Eurasian people that are happening now, they can't just choose a side and say, well, I'm going to be Chinese, or no, I'm going to be white. That's most of them choose their white side. They're going to have to say that they are Asian-Aryan is simply because neither the side, purebred sides, will choose them. And they're going to also have to be yellow-pilled in order to tell other Eurasians who are in this new cuck mentality to wake up to the fact that they have self-determined interest and can relate to both sides of the coin, and as well as their own unique culture, which whites has envisioned with Asians.
In that respect, how would you respond to the Harper's Sod route, which seems to be mainly about the asymmetry of the difference between, white males and Asian females have, well, pretty much, I would say, in all honesty, most white males attracted to East Asian women. Pretty much the ones who say they aren't are probably lying, or,
yeah.
I mean, there are some exemptions, but it doesn't seem to be the other way around, where white women choose, East Asian men to the same degree. I'm not sure why. I've talked to a few about it, and they seem to say, oh, well, I just prefer to be with a white man. And that seems to be the kind of anger or point of contention where they say this is unfair because, they're basically stealing women away from us. And they're saying that the kind of men that get these women are generally rejected from their own culture and background. How would you respond to that?
Well, first, I had a friend who I was talking to the other night named Patrick, and Patrick told me the Hapa Reddit, they're actually pseudo-white nationalists because they prefer people to segregate and prefer for your own race, and that's what they do. They give ammo to the alt-rights. The alt-right will get their little cute comic about that if a white male Asian female has a kid, then they're forever disliked. The alt-right Reddit is just going to use it to say, hey, stay with your own race, don't race mix. While ironically, the Hapa Reddit is using it for some convoluted social justice and liberal cause, for victimization. And it doesn't make sense. I mean, Eurasian writer, I think he's a troll at this point. I don't know if he's just a fanatical person who believes in these things and he might have autism or he might be scarred and it's the only thing he talks about is race relations. I mean, he developed a cargo cult on his Reddit and his website. But the point is that he's basically saying that you should be dooming and you should be suicidal if you're half, right? And you should claim victim status. You should bitch and you should join the multicultural clergy plan. Once again, why would you join the clergy plan if you take yourself as a HAPA person, right? Or you're Asian person, as if he's not even taking pride in himself. He's suicidal. I mean, the troll writer. There's this troll writer by the name of 3 different names: Jennifer Suzuki, Emily Chin Lynch, Claire Liu. I think that person is a troll, an alt-right troll. I found out about his YouTube under the Claire Liu name. And her books, I think it's a his, include My Sexual Submission to White Power, Philosophy of White Man Worshipped, and Confessions of a Submissive East Asian Woman. And these books do have wisdom in it. But at the same time, he's really triggering the HAPA Reddit because he wants to hurt them where it is. So he talks with this Desaad sex writing and then goes on to the philosophy. However, there's some good wisdom in it. I mean, I got these books because I think there is some Asian-Aryan stuff in it. You open up to Philosophy of White Man Worship on the first page, and it says, "The future of white supremacy lies in the fertile womb of East Asian women. The glory of the white race shall be preserved through the Aryan women of the East," and hence Asian-Aryan, for a lack of better terms. As if he accidentally created it, right? And so the HAPA Reddit will go and say, this troll by the name of Jennifer Suzuki is our enemy. This is the person we're up against. It's Asians who consider themselves white or are whitewashed. See, that's so evil because being white is bad, right? Well, I think the truth of the matter is HAPA, Eurasian people, are naturally trying to find white identity, and the current situation of white identity is hating yourself because you're white, and so that's what they emulate. If we had more white nationalists in power, these Eurasian people would not be anti-white. They would be pro-white, and they would eventually create Asian-Aryanism. Their biggest enemies are Tila Tequila and Margaret Cho. And it's just so stupid. It's just so... And I think I'm probably now their enemy, too. I think Pilleater has showed up like 6 or 7 times, and Eurasian Tiger has actually commented on Luke's Ford video when I was in it, and he said, "Oh, now Asians or Jews are siding together for racism, and now they're going to say BBC and ISIS or something." It's a joke. I really think he's a troll, and he's not that serious. Or if he is serious, he has one of the worst arguments ever because he really doesn't. He just wants to complain and wants to have a pity party, and so I don't take any of it seriously. And most Eurasian people I know, and quote unquote HAPA people, don't even subscribe to the HAPA Reddit.
In terms of people such as the actual alt-right, TRS forums, TRS. I think you talked to, what was his name, Seventh Son or something. Yeah. Back when I was active on Twitter, I rarely interfere with things these days in terms of activism or joining a group. I once ended up in a Twitter thread against Seventh Son, and I said, white women have to look at a lot of the issues that are making, white men angry and anti-feminist and things like this. And then I said, well, what kind of woman do you prefer? Sorry. And I said, well, a lot of white men, who I know personally, even within my own family, are dating East Asian women. And I said, it's at least worth, basically not, instead of putting all the blame on, because they were saying, white men need to sort of man up and, date these women and, have white babies and propagate the race and things. And I said, well, have you seen what's going on with divorce statistics in the West and things, at least there's some responsibility toward. And they were saying, oh, you're a faggot cook and things like cuck, is it? But I don't know, and now, with the Michael Enoch thing,
I feel bad personally for Mike. I hope, I think it's okay he has a Jewish wife. I think it's totally okay that, I just don't understand why you have to go It's like what Robert Stark says. Robert Stark says Mike Enoch could be the perfect candidate for Israeli-Aryanism. Why not? If you were to consider that, you just have to be very super defensive. But it seems to me on the white nationalist side of things, or on the alt-right, it really has become right-wing social justice warriors. If you don't follow the rules, you basically get called their vision of a cuck, or you're just get off my board, really, it boils down to. And I think the alt-right does have a secret crush on Asian women. Everyone has their Asian women stories. I mean, Ryan Andrews' book, The Birth of Prudence, is literally about white male, Asian female. And his argument is, well, you'll just dump your beautiful Asian girlfriend in favor of Western Civ, because that's how
I was,
great everything is.
I was
Right?
just about to say that.
Yeah. I interviewed him too, so.
I couldn't believe, I haven't read the book, but I couldn't believe that the conclusion they would reach. And to me, it just seems so absurd.
It is, and I didn't address Ryan with it. I was just, I'm being nice to him and just pointing out. He totally says it doesn't relate to his own life. Yet at the same time, he writes in a matter as if he had an Asian girlfriend. I mean, I know people on the alt-right that literally do have, like, Asian girlfriend here, there, here, there. It's just they keep it a big secret because there's no words or defense to tell them that it's okay to have Asian girlfriends. And I really do think Asian-Aryanism is just a okay, traumatic, post-traumatic way to understand other people who are just red-pilled or, it's okay to, you just have to be self-determined with things. And some people I know, it's more than that too, Asian-Aryanism. It's not just you're alt-right and you have an Asian girlfriend. It's also aesthetic-wise. As if you go on Twitter, there's a whole scene of, like, I retweet them on my Twitter, of these girls, white girls, who pretend they're Asian or anime characters. There are guys who are just, like, these video gamers, and they have Asian girlfriends, but don't bring it up. There's this whole West Coast hipster culture where you have Asian girlfriends and you're also into art. That is also a form of Asian-Aryanism too. It's not just Asian Americanism. It's like whites trying to get in on Asian American action. And so that can all be a form of Asian-Aryanism because we're really dreaming and perfecting a grand race we see, right? If white women model and pretend they're anime characters, they are seeing themselves as this grand real-life anime character and woman maiden of Asian-Aryanism. So it means a lot more things than being a part of the alt-right. I just flirt with the alt-right because it's really powerful and meaningful, and if you want to get people within racial boundaries, you got to have, self-preservation and discrimination between who you prefer to be around with, right? Whites prefer to be around whites. Blacks prefer to be around blacks. That's just a unique thing. Not multicultural and diversity, one utopianism. People prefer to have their own destinies. And I think mixed race people or people who come from different backgrounds, new races are formed and they also deserve determination. And I really see this everywhere. I was at Panera Bread today with my girlfriend and I saw two white male Asian female couples just eating at the place. And you have to think to yourself, you can't be quiet about these things. You got to be open. I call people who are quiet about these things new cucks, right? They're not just cucks. Not that they race mix or anything. They're new cucks because they're even denying their future they have with their Asian women or Asian lovers, right? They want to say, well, I'm a universal being, right? I don't want the clergy plan to happen. It's so stupid. You chose her because you prefer Asian culture and you preserve the discrimination of that. And so the thing is, I want people to be awake to Asian-Aryanism, pretty much bottom line on that.
Well, it's interesting you say that all the white males that I know don't really seem to have a problem with Asian males. A lot of them are friends. I know a guy, and he's a white guy, and all his friends are basically Japanese. And I've got, Chinese male friends. I know a couple of Japanese guys and things like that. And, one of them's married to a white woman, and, nobody bats an eyelid. It's not like we don't have too many sort of Africans over here. We've got a few who came in through refugee programs and things, but nobody's really shocked or cares about these pairings. They're not even really seen as interracial, if you know what I mean, to the degree that black, white, or something.
It's just the thing is, people think Asian-Aryanism is not going to happen is because the Asian male thing, right? There's so much prejudice on the Asian male as if the Asian male is a loser, that he's some guy. It's the reason why Japan has such low birth rates, is because the Asian male is in his science or getting double majors at an academia, and that I think the Asian male, I have all hope in him, right? It's the troll writer Jennifer Suzuki will just argue and say, oh, the Asian male is stupid, because that's what triggers your Asian writer, right? Because your Asian writer is an Asian male, and so if I say I hate Asian men, he's going to get triggered. Oh, this proves my theory right. Everyone just hates Asian male. I don't hate Asian men. I think they need to read Yukio Mishima and maybe Murakami and realize that there's a greater thing in life than being a fat kid that plays StarCraft all the day, or a competitive video game player and actually does something masculine. I mean, that's just and with your Asian guys coming out, it's just going to make the new definition of the Asian male. And so I think it shouldn't be focused on the what's in it for the Asian male. It is focused on the ideal that you're both white and Asian, and that there is harmony between a new feminine character and a masculine character that has more of its roots on its European side. And so that's another thing I would say on the subject too. On that, it's but it's mostly a thing, a bond between like in my fictional society, I say that okay, you can have weeb nationalism, where it's just white male, white female. They want to be anime characters, or they're into video gaming, or whatever. They're just nerds at convention centers. There could be a white borough, and they could believe that they're Asian. And then you can have an Asian borough where all the Asians, they'll be Chinese, Japanese, Korean, whatever. They love Western civilization, and they will, be not parasites, but want to be near white culture, want to be white. Then you'll have the interracial couplings between white male, Asian female, Asian male, white female. You'll also have the Eurasian group of people. And now with all those four groups together, they can all intermingle. And that Asian, and anybody can be called an Asian-Aryan from either of those four sides of the
quadrant, I guess.
Quadrant, I guess, yeah. And so it's big entryism. I told this to another friend. This isn't just Happas only, right? If it was Happas only, it would be so low. It would be like 12, 20 people in a farm somewhere, right? It's not just white male, Asian females, because that's also a low number. Well, it's a high number, but it's just we need men too. And so just imagine that you have all these people together. You can apply to be an Asian-Aryanism. It's a huge entry-level thing. Everyone is it's like this weird, it's this Americana thing. When you pledge the allegiance to America, you pledge the allegiance to Asian-Aryanism, right? I don't know, maybe I should write a doctrine on that. But yeah, it's something that's going on right now, and all my white friends have just like Asian girlfriends, and they're just quiet about it. And they're quiet about it because they're afraid, and but at the same time, that's affecting their culture and sexuality. They prefer to be with Asian women. They're just quiet. I'm trying to wake them up. I'm trying to yell at them on that.
I see, yeah. No, that's a good point, actually. I think a lot of my decisions were based on, the Harper subreddit and their views and the guilt and things. And when I don't know much about Eurasia Writer, but it doesn't seem to me, I'm not sure, what his home life was like, but I've heard of worse. He went to Harvard University, and I mean,
so he says.
What can I say?
But yeah, I think we had a good conversation, so I'm going to end the podcast here. Is there anything else you would like to say?
No, thanks for having me on. I haven't really done anything like this before, so it's an interesting talk.
Awesome. I'll talk to you later, John, okay?
Thank you, Pilleater.
Thanks for being on.
I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.